Om Brahmanandam Paramasukadam Kevalam Gyanamurtim Tandvaititam Gagana Sadrisham Tattvamashadi Laksham Ekam Nityam Vimalamatchalam Sarvadi Sakshi Bhutam Bhavatitam Trigunarahitam Sadgurum Tannamami. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. We salute the leader of our souls, through whose grace our ignorance is dispelled, who is beyond good and bad, pleasure and pain, life and death, and all other pairs of opposites. We recognize that one as the only witness to the changing phenomena of this universe. May we, through that grace, go beyond darkness and delusion and realize the truth in this very life. Om, peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om, Tat Sat. Our satsang this morning consists of 1 hour of the process called Atma Vichara, which is question and answer exchange in the atmosphere of spirituality or divine reality, however you might want to call that, by the different names that's assigned to it, by the different religious traditions of the world. And this question and answer process goes on in spiritual life around what's called the Dharma, or spiritual teachings, which, if one places one's mind upon it, then finds all the problems of life swiftly diminishing, going away, and being replaced by impressions, that is, mental impressions. The word in Sanskrit is samskara, not samsara, which is, of course, what we want to transcend, that is, cycles of birth and death in ignorance of our true nature. But the word samskara, which is a mental impression that's formed in the mind by repeated thoughts, by thinking the same thoughts over and over again. They can be of a positive kind, which is around the Dharma, that's best, or they can also be of a mixed kind or a mundane kind, by just going through mundane human convention all the while and sort of running a groove in the mind of everyday life without anything of a deeper nature attached to it, just surface existence, which consists basically of enjoyment and suffering in cycles. And one of the questions today that's come in is around that. And then, of course, it can be of a negative nature too. It's negative samskaras, which will be the cause of rebirth in worse situations than just mundane human existence. That is, it's where all the sufferings come in and that are so hard to explain, arising from karmas that come from these samskaras that were formed previously by other samskaras that were formed by karmas. It's rather a chicken and the egg kind of scenario where human life and its actions produce mental impressions, and then those mental impressions turn around and dictate the pace of life and the tenor and tone of life from there on out. In a many lifetime scenario, as we know, those of us know who have been studying in the traditions of Buddhism and Vedanta, Hinduism and so forth, those particular religions and those lineages that belong to them are constantly reminding us of the repetitive nature of existence and the repetitive nature of thought and the cause and effect nature of mind. So when we want to get to the bottom of complexes, if you want to use a more modern psychological word, Western psychological word, complexes would be one that would rise, that you could use in correlation with the word samskara. And you want to take these mental complexes apart, then in our way of thinking in spiritual life, the best way to do that is around changing the mind's vibrations to a vibration of positivity that will then follow as far as the mind's thinking process goes. It begins to water the flowers and not the weeds, as we often say in Vedanta. It's called pratipaksha bhavanam, a nice long Sanskrit word that we're used to using in satsang and in atma-vichara circles. So you, much like the prayer in Christianity, for instance, where there's hatred, you will sow love, and always looking for the opposite and more positive side of the equation. So the questions that arise in that in spiritual life, usually you see them contained or restricted to thoughts of Brahman, this word that we use in Vedanta, which means the absolute reality. Other than that, then the next step down would be what we call Ishvara in Sanskrit or in Vedanta. That brings in the personal God. So you can see right away that Vedanta particularly, and systems also like Tantra, and to a somewhat of an effect, even Yoga and Samkhya have mentions of the personal God in them. So these darshanas, or these ways of clear seeing in India, have an eye towards the personal God too. It's not as if one competes against the other. They're one reality, but when the formless reality then takes on a form, assumes a form, as we would say, and then it does so via this positive samskara, this positive side of existence, where the form that's taken on is free of karmas and is more blissful, more peaceful, more attached to truth, and adhering to the higher qualities of compassion and these more beneficial sides of existence. That would be equated with the highest mode of existence, called balance. We call that sattva in Sanskrit, rather than modes of existence like restlessness, rajas, or that mode of existence we all want to avoid, called tamas, or darkness, or heaviness, or weightiness. So when we concentrate on the form of God, then that's called Ishvara. So Brahman and Ishvara are always two topics that in satsang come up, and we're always having to explain them, as far as words can say at least, via dharmic principles that are there for us to study and have been there for hundreds and thousands of years. Actually, they're called eternal principles because we find them coming back in cycles along with everything else. If Ishvara and Brahman don't satisfy the equation, that is, or if they're not comprehensible yet to people, then there's this level of dharma, that is, take the teachings and meditate on the teachings. That's called sadhana, basically. Sadhana is many-sided, but basically we know has these 4 yogas to it. The yoga of wisdom, that is study, and the yoga of devotion, which is more adhered to the form of God, the Ishvara form, and the yoga of meditation and the yoga of action. Those two are seemingly contrary to one another, or opposite, but they're actually very necessary for the spiritual life. If you put those 4 yogas together, the yoga of action, the yoga of contemplation, the yoga of devotion, and the yoga of wisdom, or discriminating knowledge, then you have what's called a very well-rounded sadhana. And that's the 3rd principle that beings will want to question about in satsang. Like this, sat is truth, and sangha means a group of people who get together and question about the nature of truth. So sadhana would be that 3rd thing which can be questioned about how to do. It's not so much a matter of when, what, or why, or even where, because when you're talking about those four W's, you're speaking in terms of space and time and causality. Causality would probably be one of those nagging problems that you would have to address. But if you're talking about sadhana, you're talking about how to do, how to transcend, or how to solve problems that are plaguing the mind or plaguing one's life. So sadhana is a very important aspect of it all. And then, if you must, and as a concession for people who aren't able to concentrate on any three of those yet, Brahmanishvara and their sadhana, then you have to wend your way down, as it were, to this level of maya. We call a four-letter word maya, which means the appearance of things, oftentimes the very root of illusion, or delusion, as I was just chanting before we started satsang this morning. And that is, of course, necessitates the mind descending to a level that is better observed from a distance, as Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa used to say. You try and become the witness of that, which is why, again, I chanted that beautiful sloka this morning. We see divine reality as the witness of all phenomena, so we should try and be like that witness too. If God is the witness, then we should be like the Father who art in heaven, and try and come to a non-dual place where thine eye be single, and then you will see the truth. So there is the water the flowers, water the weeds quotient in it all, but then there's always this very special element in Vedanta and in Buddhism and other darshanas, or religious movements, if you will, philosophies, that sees the necessity of transcending, or practicing transcendence at least. We go into deep sleep, which is a formless place every night, and in that mode we are in a transcendent mode. We're not having anything to do with our five senses, or the five elements outwardly, or the five senses or the five elements inwardly in dream state. We've gone into a state which has turned off all 20 of those principles. And now we're in the realm pretty much of mind, and the mind isn't vibrating at that particular time, so it's not creating vrittis, and it's not creating samskaras. Well, you may use that as a sort of simile for the enlightened soul, who even in the waking state is not creating vrittis. They keep the mind so even that nothing impresses them. That is, nothing impresses itself upon the mind, and nothing thwarts them. Nothing makes them averse to existence, nor does anything make them attracted to existence. It's a hard thing to understand, because people go by attraction and aversion all the time. That's sort of how they proceed, sort of like an inchworm that goes from purchase point to purchase point, from leaf to leaf on a tree, but it never sees the tree. It never knows the movement that it's undertaking is just constant, one point to the next, from balance to action to restlessness to slothfulness, and then back to balance again, and so forth. And it never really finds any real meaning in the movement. It gets lost in the movement. So that's that level of maya that we're talking about. And it has to do with time, space, causality, and name and form, those five things. We speak a lot about the quintuplication process, 5 elements, 5 senses, but there's the fivefold principle of maya too, that has space and time in it, and then causation, and then name and form. Nama, rupa, and desha, kala, nimitta are the 5 Sanskrit words for that. Name, form, space, time, and causality. Causality would fall in a broader realm in Vedanta, under not just how two objects hit each other and and have cause and effect relationship, but how the mind is what causes mental thoughts at these 3 levels: positive, mixed, and negative, or 3 gunas. and how that then enters into our life, and the effect of it, the repercussions of it. Probably you could say the effect of good actions would be good thoughts, and would be good actions, and the effect of negative thoughts would be negative actions, and the same with mixed actions. So this is sort of all a part of the doctrine of karma, which is not an absolute law, because Brahman and Ishvara and so forth are really beyond karma. It's only when you get into this level of sadhana and maya, that is something you're trying to neutralize, that you're going to have to take up your karma. And I give this all as a sort of 10-minute preamble to one of these basic tenets of Vedanta, to answer these early questions that have come in. There's 3 or 4 questions here, and in the 45 or so minutes remaining, as we're restricted to 1 hour this morning, I'll try and take these up and look at their most important elements of them, because they are pretty broad, as most questions in spiritual life are. Their truth may be simple, but it's simply profound, and its ramifications are quite often complex in terms of religion and philosophy particularly, and how the 2 wings of the bird can help the bird get off the ground. We say the 2 wings of the bird would be like things like grace and self-effort, or philosophy and religion. Those kinds of higher dualities, form and formlessness, that the mind ponders and immediately goes to a higher position. It's very wonderful, quite miraculous really, how a mind can all of a sudden take itself out of sin and transgression, or suffering, or grief, or boredom, dullness, those kinds of things that are plaguing the mind constantly, and can all of a sudden just rise to a very positive position, or a transcendent position, like in deep sleep. We just have to study the modes of our consciousness in order to know that we have the power to shift our consciousness that way. The person without that knowledge of the ability to do that is at the mercy of nature and its 3 modes of things like restlessness and darkness, heaviness. You see, it can't get out of them. And every once in a while only it might experience an even moment, or even a higher vision, a transcendent moment. And it'll marvel at that. But until it really studies it through teachings of the Dharma and begins to practice with sadhana, spiritual discipline, then it won't avail of itself of those powers that it has. It's always looking for the grace of God, or for always looking behind for the influence of the devil. So it's always running from one and searching for the other, but it's never coming to rest in its own nest, like a bird, like the hawk in its own nest. That's actually a saying right out of the Upanishads. The soul must come to rest in its own perfection. Be thee perfect, as thy Father in heaven is perfect, kind of idea. So that as a preamble, as I'm saying, can answer some of these questions. The first one being about karma. The questioner here from West Coast says, if the aspirant has an intense and constant sadhana, that's why I defined this early on for us, sadhana is spiritual discipline. It's not like things such as exercise or therapy or things like that, which have their place. But sadhana is particular to spiritual discipline that is going to get to the root of our mental problems and complexes and diffuse them. So again, if an aspirant has an intense and constant sadhana, spiritual discipline, but desires for sense and worldly enjoyment remain, what defines moderation of the fulfillment of these desires? How do we know when it is the right and mature time to give up these desires? Well, you're talking in the same sentence here about fulfillment and renunciation. The two should go together, really. It's not always the case. I mean, you have cases where People cannot renounce because their desires never get fulfilled. And that's quite common in the world, really. People, just like they proceed via these dualities, one of those is this problem of good and bad, or virtue and vice. They're always moving along on the past impetus of their karmas, which have been formed by their actions and their thoughts previous. And when we say previous in Vedanta, we won't mean just previous to this day, like yesterday or last year, or when I was a child. Yes, those actions that we did, or that others did to us, that we did to others, form a part of our backdrop of impetus, whether we're going in a straightforward direction, or whether we're taking a zigzag course, or whether we're stopping and running hot and cold in our life's goals. That's all predicated on this previous motion in one lifetime. But when we say previous in Vedanta, we also are taking into account things that can't necessarily be traced to this lifetime, that can only be traced to a previous existence, and have made us who we are, even at the time of our appearance in the mother's womb, and from then on. They're post-mortem experiences, but they're also pre-mortem experiences. That is, before you were born, you're going to have to meditate on that time when I was formless, when I had no form. Just like deep sleep tonight, you have no form. So, it's not like past, present, and future are going to be the bottom line here. It's that the mind can transcend the three phases of time and look at them. We don't usually think of it we think in terms of being a slave to time, and a slave to cause and effect, and a slave to space. And so those are the three elements of Maya. Just three of the five elements of Maya. I just said Desha, Kala, and Nimitta: space, time, and causality. We call them Maya not for no good reason. And the reason we call them Maya is so that we have a place to put the hat of karma, a nail to hang it on. So we'll explain the predicament we're in right now, whether the predicament be good, bad, or mixed. It's always going to be changing, because whoever's aware of wisdom also has to be aware of ignorance, and who's aware of good also has to be aware of bad, and so you're still caught in this realm of Maya, dualities basically. Dvandva mohina is the Sanskrit term in the Gita by Sri Krishna, the deluding pairs of opposites, the warring pairs of opposites. So those are brought forward to help us deal with that. So here the questioner is talking about desire and fulfillment, a fulfillment of desires and then renunciation of desires. There are really, as I count them, some 7 different ways of dealing with desire that I've seen listed in the scriptures and by the seers and the saints of our traditions. And 3 of them are inferior, and 4 of them are superior. And amongst those superior ones, fulfillment of desires is one of the legitimate ways to deal with desire. That's usually the way the householder proceeds, or the normal soul of the world. They usually proceed by trying to fulfill their desires. It reminds me, though, of my teacher's once-a-year lecture he always used to give. He titled it "Satiation Never Comes," because he was looking at all the Western householders. He was a monk from India. He came here and lived amongst us for many decades, and he saw us in our attempts to try and fulfill our desires. The Bhoga Marga, he would call it, the path of enjoyment. And he was a monk, and he was practicing the Jnana Marga, that is the path of discriminative wisdom, which withdraws from enjoyment, because the knowledge behind enjoyment, behind the whole process, is that enjoyment gives rise to a sorrow, and then sorrow gives rise to more desire for enjoyment, and so you have this Mayic cycle. See, and people keep proceeding like that day to day, year to year. Then they run an impression of their mind of joy and sorrow into their mind, and they live in joy and sorrow. See, whatever the mind concentrates on, it becomes. Like a crystal, you put it in front of a red flower or a green flower or a blue flower, it'll change colors. The mind is rather like that. So that then brings up this observation of the illumined souls about the nature of Maya and how it impresses itself on the mind and then causes, not just in this lifetime, from the cradle to the grave, but in a previous lifetime, causes people to be operating under the weight of their samskaras, of their mental impressions. Yet all the time having the power to transcend them, to back off of them and observe them. If you put energy into a thing, then it's going to develop a complexity to it. And if that thing happens to be a weed, and you're watering it constantly, then it's going to grow, just like any weed in your garden. But if you shift the emphasis of that to the flower and not the weed, then the weed tends to dwindle. Although some weeds are very tenacious, you probably know if you've gardened. But if you're a gardener of the mind, you know that some problems go away at a very slow rate. You have to bring a lot of light, a lot of intensity into your sadhana, your practice, in order to diffuse those. And it might take years working on a particular complex that you've taken years to develop in another lifetime or in earlier in your life. So then if you're watering the flowers, then you're having this better effect on the mind, and desires can begin to approach fulfillment. The questioner says at the end, how do we know when it is the right and mature time to give them up completely? I don't think you would have to give them up. When they ripen and they fall off. The teaching in Tantra is that your imperfections were taken on by you in a previous lifetime, and they were taken on purpose, because when they're unripe karmas, you see, and their real purpose is not to make you suffer or to put you off the path or to make you deluded or get into cycles of rebirth and death in delusion. Their real purpose is to unveil the presence of God. How do desires and problems unveil the presence of God? Is that when they go away, then God, the light of God, is seen immediately. So they're like fruits on a tree, you see. They're green, they're unripe, but as soon as they ripen, they fall off. So that's one of the beautiful teachings in Tantra about the fulfillment or natural renunciation of desire. You go ahead and do your practice and your spiritual practice, your studies, your meditations, your bhakti, your devotions, and serving all beings as God, action, that is right action, as the Buddha would call it in the Eightfold Path. And then you notice over time, maybe not all at once, but generally, that these malas, they're called, or these imperfections in you are beginning to disappear. And in their place is just this feeling of peace. See? The samskara of suffering and negativity and worry and brooding has all of a sudden been transformed to a samskara of balance, evenness, equanimity of mind, peace of mind, those beautiful things, peace of mind. What the questioner is probably getting at here, though, and which is a problem for most people, is that there's a zone in between the negative and the positive called pleasure. And this is why I brought up my teacher's name of his lecture, Satiation Never Comes, because he watched the Westerners so long dealing with this problem of pleasure, the Westerners particularly, or the members of any kind of opulent society, dealing with all the material wealth and the pleasure it brings, and then the samskara that's formed, the mental impression that's formed around wealth and pleasure. I would say renunciation happens there. If you see that you're under the gun, under the press, at the mercy of, or at the beck and call of objects, material objects, and attachment to material objects, that's where you better start practicing renunciation. If you've been fulfilling your desires naturally in a dharmic way all along, no problem. You see, Holy Mother Sri Devi's divine consort, Sri Ramakrishna's divine consort, and my teacher's teacher used to just say that. These desires, what are they to you? You're a devotee of God. The more they come and go, the better for you. So if you've taken refuge in the Dharma, and you've taken a vow of devotion to Ishvara, those are two of those essential elements we were just talking about, then no problem for you. You can go ahead and live your life and watch those desires dwindle, naturally so, and fall off like fruits off a tree. It's a very important tantric teaching. However, if on the other hand you enter that zone of pleasure and lackadaisicalness, indeterminacy around keeping up a spiritual practice, you see, because he says if the aspirant has an intense and constant spiritual practice, so there, it might be better put, you should have an intense spiritual practice, not if. You must make sure that your day is infused with spiritual practice, at least, even if you're a busy householder, at least, meditation in the morning and at night, and some study of scripture, and some attendance of the gurus and the Dharma. Those kinds of things are extremely important for the neutralization of karmas, and therefore the freeing of the mind from mental impressions that bind samskaras. It frees you from that, and you begin to live in a more dharmic way, and then you live in a more divine way, and then finally you live in a more transcendent way, from morality to teachings of the Dharma, from teachings of the Dharma to peace of mind, from peace of mind to transcendence of mind. And that can all happen all in one body, in one lifetime. It's a matter of shifting of consciousness, not a matter of the transformations of nature, which are birth, growth, disease, old age, decay, and death. You see, those are the things that otherwise are there for you to ponder, oftentimes without solutions and answers. But the Dharma is a definitive answer to these problems. So we must then inspect our consciousness, as I just said, and then inspect our life situation. If we're attached to pleasures, then we might have wandered into that zone that is sandwiched between dharmic life and worldly life. And it's called satisfaction with material objects and with the pleasures they bring. Renounce that right away. You see. Renounce it how? By fulfilling your desires in the Dharma while keeping up an intense sadhana. I think I've answered that question then, and with the time remaining, let's go to another question. This local person here in Hawaii, one of our local students says, "We know that Brahman is unchanging and in everything. We are told we are Brahman, for it is the essence of everything. But what actually is Brahman?" Well, you put me on the spot, because Brahman can't be described, can't be explained, can't be conceived even. So how can the mind that's trying to deal with everything in terms of conception, including conception of the Dharma and teachings, how can it give you the definitive answer? That's a matter of direct spiritual experience. But the Dharmic teachings point to and can talk around such great principles. Like if you're at the level of Brahman, then there is no mind and there is no problem. So you are that thou art, and that's what the questioner is saying. Here we are told that we are Brahman, that thou art. Means that, Brahman, thou, you are. There's no difference between you and divine reality. You are that divine reality. It's a very Advaitic or non-dual proclamation. And it's called a Mahavakya, or a great saying. It's what the great renunciate soul would be contemplating all the time, rather than a mantra. A mantra has more to do with Ishvara, the form of God. But these Mahavakyas have more to do with those beings who have come so close to God that they're looking to fuse. They're looking to merge back into their divine essence, like a hailstone into an ocean. Or, as Sri Ramakrishna said, I became a salt doll and then I walked into the ocean to try and measure its depths. But salt doll is just solidified salt and the ocean is liquid salt. So once it walks in, it just becomes that, you see. So the line of demarcation between God and mankind disappears there. And duality turns from two into not two. You could say one, but that would limit it. All of a sudden you feel like you're having the experience of I and my Father are one, or that thou art. You find that in different traditions. That same realization has been reached by certain souls whose sadhana had become so intense and whose devotion had become so powerful and whose meditation had become so deep and whose action had become so far distant from them, all action, then they came to this unified state, this homogeneous state of awareness. Again, like the shifting of awareness from different states, it can shift so deep, so far inward ascension, that it can become that which it contemplates. The mind, if it takes on like a crystal takes on the different colors of different flowers it's placed and different objects it's placed in it, then it should be able to remain colorless too, isn't it? Because the crystal is colorless by nature. It's taking on the colors of things. But if you leave it by itself, then it's clear, you see. So that's called original mind. So we should turn away from colorations, from modifications, from taking on and assuming of forms as if they were real, to this transcendent position of original mind, which is just the crystal in its nature of clarity. Khyati is the word in yoga and Vedanta. Clarity, this original clarity. So that is Brahman. You ask what is Brahman, probably the best answer, one word would be consciousness. In English, consciousness or awareness. But it's consciousness and awareness without modifications. The crystal without any overlays or colors. The mirror with nothing near it, you see. Nothing to reflect, because if it's put the mirror, near a treasure chest, and then it's reflecting wealth all the time, you see. And that's that zone you don't want to wander into, where your wealth might be in a bank somewhere, but you're still thinking about it, you see. And you can't get your mind off it. You're trying to amass it, you see. And therefore, you're never thinking about what's beyond money and wealth and its pursuit. And that beauty of divine reality, the peace of original mind, the bliss of the realized soul. Those things are far away from you still, because the mind has become modified by something. So you could also approach the what is Brahman question from the standpoint of what it is not. We know it's not Maya, name, form, time, space, and causality, which we were just talking about, those fivefold elements of Maya. So it's nameless, it's formless, and it's beyond time, and it's transcendent of space, and it doesn't operate by cause and effect like everything else does. There's a beautiful description from the negative side of what Brahman is not. What Brahman is by considering what Brahman is not. So if you want to put that in terms of like the Upanishads would say, it's not an object, it's not an energy, and it's not a thought. Saitashvatara Upanishad. It's not an object, matter. It's not energy, prana, and it's not lived by bread alone, prana. And it's not thought, because you go beyond thought, then you'll find Brahman. But as soon as the mind starts to think, Brahman disappears to the background, you see, because some modification has come over it. These are very simple teachings, really, but if you entertain them in the mind for long enough, the mind remembers its true nature as being colorless, like a crystal, without any modifications, and it tends to go there. That's called samadhi. And samadhi really is, if we learned anything from Sri Ramakrishna's appearance in the 1800s amongst us, it was this avatar, this grand incarnation. If we've learned anything from him, we've learned that samadhi is really the true nature of human beings. You could put it in terms of this question, what is Brahman? It is samadhi. It is the highest samadhi. It's the highest state of awareness. And of course words are going to fail because they're higher than you think lower, or deeper than you think surface. But these are the only ways we have with which to describe the indescribable. The Dharma will point to certain teachings which will help the mind ponder its nameless, formless, timeless, deathless, causeless nature, and then it will begin to assume that. Just like it assumed forms before, now it's turning around and it's assuming formlessness. That's all. And actually it finds it can shift perfectly fine from form to formlessness without any problem, without any karma, without any residue. And it becomes very facile at that, going in and out, going in and out. And if you can go in and out, waking, dreaming, deep sleep, every 24 hours, then you can go in and out in your meditation twice a day, from form to subtle form to formlessness, and back to form again. You sit on your cushion, you sit on your asana, and you go out. That is in. You go, drive me out of my mind, as one of the songs of India says, or turn and face the original. You've seen the assimilation for Brahman. I mean, that gets to the part of this question also, you see, everything is a simulation of Brahman. When we say all is Brahman, then are we going to disclude the world? Isn't the world too Brahman? It is Brahman if you've realized Brahman. That's all. If you haven't, then it's not. I mean, let's just be very plain about it. Beings can't go around doing errant actions and thinking errant thoughts, back to the karma question, and expect to be able to make a true assessment of what Brahman is. They're not even conscious on a deep level yet, so how can Brahman, consciousness itself, be realized? See, it's not going to happen. So this is the line of demarcation. This is the healthful separation that you must make. You're trying to get rid of all separation so that oneness will occupy the mind in spiritual life. But there's this one distinction you're going to have to keep for a while. And that's the distinction between the real and the unreal. It's Vedanta's forte, you see. Is nitya, anicca, vastu viveka. You must know the difference between nitya, the eternal, and anicca, the non-eternal. Once you know that, you're fine, whether you go to samadhi or come back to samadhi of the body. See? It's all one state of awareness, and the lines of demarcation are not just blurred, they're eradicated. And that's where you'll find a seer living in one state of awareness, like I found my teacher when I first met him, an 80-year-old monk when I met him, and was with him for 10 or 15 years, watching him in one state of awareness. He had practiced it so much that that was his modus operandi. Truth was his modus operandi. He wouldn't shift. Or when he did shift, it was so effortless that you couldn't notice that he was shifting. Life was extremely simple, is extremely simple for a person like that. There are no decisions to make anymore. It's wonderful, really. But it's very subtle and very difficult to see. Holy Mother used to say, "Why have you come to see me? Have I grown two horns?" As if to see, is there something sensational about me that's different from you? That I'm God and you're not? See, no, it's all inside. All of my realizations have happened inside of me where you can't see them. She used to say, Hasta Amalaka. It's a beautiful stotram in India called the fruit in the palm of your hand. It means, and she said, I can take out my Atman and look at it in meditation anytime I want. Can you do that, my child? See, and then I can just put it back in and cover it up with my wearing cloth and go about my daily business. And that taking out and putting on of the Atman, so to say, outwardly, was completely invisible and unknown to everyone around her. So that she seems like a simple village woman. But Sri Ramakrishna comes along and says, she's more like a village cat who rolls in ashes to conceal her true color. See, there's a certain kind of cat, probably tabby cat or yellow cat, that other cats will pick on because of its strange looking nature. So the spiritual soul often will disguise its spiritual nature in the clothes of a normal everyday life. So you won't be able to see any difference between them and others. But you'll know a difference there when you come close. You'll get attracted, you'll come close to that soul. And you'll know there's something very special about that. Well, that whole process I'm describing is just like seeing Brahman. You'll only know Brahman when you feel Brahman and you become very attracted to Brahman and begin to come close to Brahman, otherwise not. You might as well just be day and night, you see, dualities, just complete opposites. So you'll have to develop that subtlety. And in Vedanta we develop that nitya vastu viveka, the difference between the real and the unreal. We use that as the criterion for our life. You don't have a spiritual life in Vedanta if you don't have discrimination between the real and the unreal. You can do as many physical asanas as if you want. You can dance around and sing kirtan. You can wear really good clothes and attend satsang and bow at the Guru's feet and practice destruction of the mind's waves in meditation and eat good organic food. None of that is spiritual life unless you have viveka, the discrimination between what's real and what's unreal. And that will only disappear. That one separation will only disappear once you've realized Brahman. Then you're free, you see, to cast away that distinction too. However, you will pick it up again when you come down out of samadhi and assume everyday life. You won't abandon your discrimination. You won't run around everywhere saying, oh, all is God, all is God. Because down here there are so many souls, hundreds and thousands of souls who will not take kindly to that, or will not understand what you're saying, will not be able to see what you've experienced. Why have all the great souls that we know, and the founders of religion, been ostracized by humanity? They've only been accepted later, after they passed from the body, and the religion started to grow. People had to understand them by little gradients, just by little bits and pieces. They came to understand them. And only a few souls understood them when they were in the body. See, that's a very rare thing. The inner circle, the antaranga we call it in Sanskrit. Those souls knew the Great One and saw it coming, going. Krishna says that in the Gita quite often. He says, like the wind takes scents from flowers and blows them to different places. Just like that, God moves amongst people. That's a beautiful analogy. You catch a whiff of the flower and you don't see the flower anywhere, you see. So that's how God moves in and out of bodies, Sri Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita. So all of that anyway in accord with this question of what is Brahman. Might be better said, who is Brahman, and then concluded, we are Brahman, or I am Brahman. That Mahavakya is Aham Brahmasmi. Aham Brahmasmi. I am Brahman. There is no difference between this and that, between good and bad, pleasure, pain, life and death. It's just that I'm going to have to keep my discrimination so that I know the difference between good and bad, and pleasure and pain, and life and death, until I can become one myself with Brahman, till I can experience the state of oneness. I keep that discrimination up to that time. And then if I ever come back and visit form again, should I come back from form of samadhi, then I'll have to take up that discrimination and use it as the qualifier here, as the shield, as the protector. I'll never be without that. The seers are never without that. So that's a very important teaching in Vedanta, this teaching of Viveka. It's the first of 4 treasures. It's followed by Vairagya, detachment, and then the 6 jewels of inner peace, self-control, forbearance, contentment, faith, and concentration. And then the fourth jewel, the fourth treasure is called mumukshutvam, a desire to be free. So those 4 treasures and 6 jewels are called sadhana chatushtaya. That is, sadhana is that word, spiritual discipline. If there is a discipline in Vedanta, which is known for its concentration on non-dual truth alone, then it is the practice of non-duality is defined by keeping your discrimination intact and making your detachment mature. It's actually an answer for both of these questions. Whether in the realm of karma or in the realm of Brahman, both of these things are going to be an answer to any question that might come up around them. So, Brahman is consciousness. The word for that in Sanskrit is chaitanya, and the way to say it is that thou art, or sarvam kalvidam Brahman. All this is Brahman. It's only Brahman if you have that filter on, though. You're only Brahman once you realize Brahman. And you can't make that proclamation until you have had that realization of Brahman, and you can operate in a higher state of awareness. There's the import of shifting consciousness again. Shifting consciousness to different stations, but those stations are all held in one all-pervasive atmosphere. It's the way we have to look at it from the standpoint of qualified non-dualism. So philosophically speaking, you're saying dualism, qualified non-dualism, and non-dualism. Here is my discovery, Swami Vivekananda said. Everything that is to be known exists in the Vedanta. And by what Vedanta, he says, what I mean by that is the 3 stages of Vedanta. Dualism, which is pray to your Father in heaven. Qualified non-dualism, which is I'm the vine and you're the branches. And non-dualism, which is I and my Father are one. So if you want to put it in Christian speak, then you can show the 3 levels of philosophy, how people proceed from praying to their Father in heaven, to connecting with the Christ, to the Christ becoming one with the Father, and you being perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. How all of that fits in those 3 levels. So it's a very important teaching that Vivekananda uncovered in the Vedanta and made broadcast here in the late 1800s and early 1900s when he was in the body, and passed it on to us so that we can understand that. If you want to put it in terms of people, then you would go to the Tantra and say Pasu, Virya, and Daiva. If you want to put it in terms of philosophy, then dualism, qualified non-dualism, and non-dualism. But if you want to put it in terms of creatures, that is, manifested beings, then you're going to put Pasu, Virya, and Daiva. Those 3 words. Pasu means animalistic, Virya means heroic, and Daiva means divine. And there are many, many souls that are still operating at an animalistic level. You might have noticed. You might have noticed war and violence and dishonesty and lack of integrity, and on you cite the problems in the human race and in nations and so forth. And you can just pretty much then put a coverall term with it. They did in ancient times, Pasu. They're still operating at an animalistic type of level. Still very much attracted to the body, attached to the body, to pleasures, and to domination over others, and all sorts of other occult and lesser powers that are here. So when one makes a shift of consciousness, it's going to be to heroic. That's what virya means. All of a sudden you shift out of your animalistic behavior and thought patterns, and you make that shift of consciousness to virya. Now I'm heroic. In other words, I'm thinking less of myself and more of others. Animalistic people are thinking more of themselves and less of others. Maybe not of others at all. No sensitivity around them, around their suffering, for instance. But the heroic person all of a sudden takes on this ambiance of taking care of others. See? So back to the question there about desires and fulfilling them, the family man will begin to fulfill his desires by taking care of his family in a heroic way. Now, remember, there are many animalistic types of fathers and mothers, worldly people with families, who are pretty much having families just for their own selfish gratification, just so they can enjoy and just so they can lord over, dominate, and so forth. These are worldly people, worldly families. Tamasic wombs, or rajasic wombs, Krishna calls them in the Gita. They're not wombs with a view, as we say comically in Vedanta. You want a sattvic womb. You want parents who are dharmic, who want to free you. See, you're under their care so that they can free you. That's the kind of parent you want to take on in your next birth, if not in this birth. So that's all has to do with a heroic turn of mind. A person all of a sudden has a desire for the higher good of people, concrescence of the human spirit, amelioration of the human race. Those are very admirable qualities you see in a heroic type of person. The whole society, not just his family, takes the whole society on and wants the best for them. But back again to the worldly, animalistic person, there are many people who are having families who are still of that level of consciousness. So you begin to look for those people who are showing these traits of virya. Now, and as I was saying in terms of this former question, desires aren't going to be able to be satisfied in the animalistic level of consciousness, pasu. Those desires are going to be actually perpetuated, like pouring gas on fire instead of water. So that one has to be careful of. But they can be attenuated and even neutralized at the level of virya, divine, because the soul is making that shift of consciousness from individual to collective. Now, when it goes to divine, daivi, then it goes from heroic to divine consciousness. That is, pasu, virya, and daiva means you go to the level of a seer or a sage or a yogi or a realized soul, person who's had spiritual experiences. And now all of a sudden they're at a cosmic level of consciousness, individual, collective, cosmic. So you could make a case and point for the pasu, virya, and daiva kind of soul, animalistic, heroic, and divine, as being almost correlative with those levels of consciousness. That is, if you have just an individual body, individual mind, individual desires and wants, and you're only out for the individual, then you're still at a sort of animalistic kind of level of consciousness. You may even be a decent person, say, and practicing morality and so forth, or being honest and so forth. But it's really when you begin to broaden your scope to see the oneness of all existence. That is, I and my father are one, but also I and my brother or my sister are also one. Same elements in the body, same thoughts in the mind. Then you'll be able to understand this level of collective mind. And from collective you can then go to cosmic mind, which is God's mind. One of the questions here, which we probably won't have time to answer, is what's the difference between collective consciousness and the higher realm called, the higher realm would be called cosmic mind. Mahat is the word in Sanskrit, the great mind. So you can see the difference there, another set of threes between individual mind, collective mind, and cosmic mind. The enlightened souls have, in this shifting of consciousness we were talking about, has shifted from, they can come down and touch the animalistic nature just so they know what it's like. And then they can shift to the heroic nature. That's probably where they're going to operate from, the qualified non-dualistic level. But then they can also have the ability to go into non-duality, into samadhi, into higher states of consciousness, and have communion with divine reality. and that would be more leading towards the cosmic mind. It would be almost like, you know, your deep sleep state tonight. Only you'd have to take your consciousness with you into deep sleep so that you could see what's there. The light of consciousness is there. And all the seeds for what we call creation nowadays are in deep sleep. All the seeds are there ready to be watered. So that state of formlessness would be something that you would look at if you were a practitioner. Just like we're talking about it now in satsang, you're going to want to look at it in practice as an individual. And then the individual will become collective and cosmic, and will be able to go back and forth between those modes of consciousness with ease. Can be the individual, operate on an individual level, free of animalism and passions and so forth and desires. Can shift to the collective level, its ancestors, the gods and goddesses. This is all collective consciousness. The angels, the celestials. But then can shift beyond that, marvelously so, to the Trinity, towards the great enlightened soul, the seers, the saints, the rishis, souls who in the past have realized this once and for all, and have put an end to attachment to relativity, and have transcended the Maya and have gone into a state of Mahamaya or beyond. And that would be cosmic consciousness. Now, cosmic consciousness is not the ultimate. The ultimate you would have to call full of consciousness, permeated by consciousness. Like sweetness permeates sugarcane juice, Sri Ramakrishna says. That would be the state of Brahman in everything. You have the cane, and you have the juice, and then you have the sweetness in the juice. Or sometimes he'd say you have the body, you have the bone, and you have the marrow in the bone, you see. So those three levels of awareness, you could use analogies for them. We call them gross, subtle, and causal, the three worlds. And we have three bodies that go with them: the outer body, the dream body or inner body, and the cosmic body. So these are all correlative and all helpful for all questions that go from karma all the way up to Brahman. I mean, we took basically the two or three questions today which had to do with the two bookends of, you see, Brahman as reality, as consciousness itself, as the essence, and then the whole other end of the spectrum was, how did I get into this karmic fix where I've forgotten myself as Brahman, and now I'm suffering good and bad, pleasure, pain, life and death, and so forth, in rounds. So I hope you've enjoyed this hour of satsang with SRV associations, and we will be live streaming this afternoon a class on dissolving the mind stream in Kundalini Yoga, and that will be at 2:30 Hawaii time, so you can look for your respective time zones to join us for that 3-hour class with a break in the middle. And then the following weekend will be no live streaming, as we're on retreat at the American River. Come join us. And then you'll have to pick up the live streamings thereafter in Portland, Oregon, for 2 weekends in Portland, Oregon, at the SRV Association ashram there. You can look on your emails on our website, or the emails that you've been receiving from SRV, or get on our email list for all of that. You'll be able to follow us not only live, but in our live streaming classes. So we bring it to a close here, and with this chant, which is very apropos for the subjects today. Om Sato Ma Sat Gamoya, Tamaso Ma Joytir Gamoya, Mrityor Ma Amritam Gamaya, Abhira Abhira Mayeti, Rudryate Dakshinam Mukam, Tenamam Pahinicham, Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. Lead us from darkness to light, from lower truth to higher truth, from the unreal to the real, and from the illusion of death to eternal life. Reach us through and through, O Lord and Mother of the universe, with thy sweet and benign presence. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om Hari Om Hari Om Tat Sat.